here to explore how the Midwest's independent thinking can rethink industry and politics and disrupt the national status quo. Former U.S. Congressman and entrepreneur Peter Meijer.
Morning. I apologize, that image was before I grew my hair out a little bit longer. I'm Peter Meijer, former member of Congress. I want to make very clear from the outset, I am not now running for office, nor do I have any plans to run for office at any point in the foreseeable future. And I say that so you can actually trust that what I am saying is what I believe. I'm not trying to tiptoe around landmines for fear of offending a particular important constituency. I'm not trying to calibrate. None of you are going to vote for me. And just to prove that I'm willing to disqualify myself from public service, I am from Michigan. I represented Grand Rapids and Battle Creek in Congress. So I will say something that is uniquely disqualifying for a Michigander. The state of Ohio is doing a fantastic job. I've spent a lot of time in Columbus lately. In my current role at the New Industrial Corporation, we're a company that exists to help build and finance the next generation of industrial champions. I won't get into how we kind of blend venture capital and infrastructure project development, but the moral of the story is there is a strong reindustrialization movement afoot. It is exciting. It is fantastic. It is the weirdest group of founders and true believers and fanatics who have this fever dream of once again having the United States be an industrial powerhouse on the global stage. And in the course of that business, I talked to, or at this point in the past 2 years, probably over 600 companies. These are startups. Some of them are getting a little bit more mature. You know, we want to figure out how to help them put shovels in the ground. We're infrastructure project developers, so we are where the rubber hits the road. I mean, it's rarely actually brick and mortar. It's mostly steel and concrete, but it's that built environment. And I get so inspired by talking to these companies. It'll be all over the map. One day it's some guy who's been tasked with figuring out how to build gas stations on the moon in order to get us to Mars, and that's a very interesting and novel problem. The next day it'll be somebody taking also a novel and interesting approach to making it cheaper for municipalities to process human bio-waste. So from the stars to kind of the most grounded thing, we cover it all. And that's exciting. But every conversation, there's a point that I am dreading, and I know will take my earlier enthusiasm and kind of tank it. And that's when I ask them where they're planning to build. Texas is the easy plurality answer, followed by North Carolina, Virginia, Tennessee, Georgia. If I can get to the point where it's like, have you guys looked at the Midwest, right? I'm from Grand Rapids. I have a fiduciary responsibility to our investors to make sure that these facilities are located in the optimal place for their growth and success as a company, but I want to put my thumb on the scale so hard and get them into the Midwest. I give Ohio a tremendous amount of credit, but it's a very steep drop-off after Ohio. It's Ohio, da-da-da-da-da, Indiana, da-da-da-da-da, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota. With all due respect to Governor Pritzker of Illinois, Illinois has never once come up, and I kind of understand why. You can have all the same annoyances in California, and you get the most perfect climate known to man. You have beautiful scenery and a very strong industrial base out there. And I take away this lesson that we shouldn't be overthinking things. It's no secret why some states are succeeding in attracting new companies and in growing population and having that net immigration. If we in the Midwest want to be more like that, just steal their ideas, copy what they're doing, right? Energy costs are one of the biggest inputs for many of these firms, right? That can make a huge difference. And to be very clear, it's not just what energy costs are today, but it's where those companies look and forecast they might be 5 or 10 years from now. So it's as important to try to get those prices down now as it is to make sure that you have a flexible enough permitting and planning and investing environment that those rates aren't going to skyrocket, because as things are today is how they will always be, and we've cast it in amber, right? Housing costs. This is always mentioned on the affordability side of the house, because you know what, the more expensive it is to live in a place, the more your employees are going to have to get paid in order to get by, the more your labor costs are going to factor in, right? All of these are these inflating components that just get worse as they're thought through. And that's before I get into the corporate tax structure and then also the income tax structure and all that. But I don't, for the life of me, understand, and this was one of my biggest frustrations in Congress, there's all of this desire to kick things up to the federal level, to have that be the place where all these decisions are being made. And it's like, no, we have states, and states are doing different things, and you should compare and contrast and steal the stuff that's working. Austin, Texas has built a boatload of new housing, and they have seen their real estate prices going down dramatically. I mean, 20, 30% off of their peaks of 2 or 3 years ago. Mississippi went from a basket case on education to the Mississippi Miracle. Like, that should embarrass every state whose per head count of funding is dramatically higher. So I don't want to be seen as overly glum and gloomy and down on the Midwest, because we have a tremendous amount of potential, but it's not enough just to be doing well. Ultimately, at the end of the day, those investments, they multiply and they amplify on each other. And one of the things that has frustrated me so much as a Michigander is Michigan has been overthinking it. You heard earlier about Minnesota's population demographic forecast. It's the same for much of the Midwest. In Michigan, we had a similar discussion in our state, and our governor established a commission. And the commission spent many months and many more millions of dollars to put out a study that had, a couple of proposals and even less action that followed. Because it was an exercise in pressing the do something button. There wasn't actually that follow through, there wasn't that commitment, and it took place against a backdrop of frankly, political instability. How many of you are familiar with the Line 5 pipeline? It doesn't necessarily run through Minnesota, Superior, Wisconsin, down to Port Huron and over to Sarnia. It's very controversial. It runs under the Mackinac Strait in the Great Lakes, and it's old. It's almost 70 years old. 2018, the pipeline company agreed, this thing's past its date, we got to put a tunnel in, we got to put the pipeline through. Unions loved it, environmentalists hated it. Environmentalists hated it because they wanted the pipeline to go away, period. Setting aside the fact that it's not something Michigan could do, that pipeline is governed not just by interstate and federal laws and jurisdictions, but actually part of a 1977 international treaty with Canada, because it starts in Canada, ends in Canada, right? This is not just something that a bunch of folks at a community board meeting in a local municipality can raise their fists and get shut down, right? It's complicated. Had that tunnel been built in 2018, it would have been completed by late 2019. There would be no more threats to the Straits of Mackinac from a potential anchor getting dragged across it or anything else. It's still there. It's still at that risk. Because at the end of the day, the hardest problem with governance is balancing the diverse set of minority interests and majority interests that are at work. In this case, the environmentalists, they won in the delay, though I would argue it's not in the best interest of the environment to have that status quo be existing. And at the same time, members of that same political constituency, the union members, they lost in that. They lost out on good paying jobs, on underwater welding, on all of the different elements that the pipe fitters and the boiler makers and all these other groups could have had. And as part of our problem, when we take an approach and kind of spurn our preference towards an engineering state and our belief in the future and it's sort of a dynamic industrial recovery, and put too much emphasis on a lawyerly state. No offense again to the lawyers in the room, but on a lawyerly state that looks for reasons to say no, that looks for reasons to stop, as opposed to trying to guide progress going into the future. So I think that is where we need to be as a Midwest. We need to not just be content with reaching what we view our best practices, but continually update that, because at the end of the day, I want us all to win. You know, it's myself against my brother and I against the world. So that's why Ohio is my brother in this scenario, and again, that's why I've foreclosed any potential future political office. But this is something the Midwest has done before. We did it in World War II. We became the arsenal of democracy. The same New Yorker cover, you know, from a couple of years ago that showed New York, California, and then just an empty space in between. During World War II, the Defense Production Board, they had that, and it was basically the Midwest and nothing else, except California, because they were building a bunch of ships. So we can get back to that, but it's going to require understanding that this rising tide is not something to take for granted, that we need to actively be working on it. We need to understand that if we're fighting for table scraps, we're all going to get hungry, but that we have an incredible legacy to build on, but it's going to require political courage and a lot of determination in order to overcome a status quo that was not arrived at by accident. So, thank you very much.